My name is Kalen, and the record books are wrong. They'll tell you about the legends, the men who summited Everest 8, 9, 10 times. But they won't tell you about me. I've stood on the roof of the world 11 times, and I stopped registering my climbs with the authorities decades ago. I'm telling you this now because the silence has become heavier than any mountain, and I can't carry it anymore. I will never go back. My confession isn't about the climbs. It's about who was watching me on every single one of them. For over 40 years, I've had a silent partnership with a creature the world believes is a myth, a guardian. And the truth I'm about to share is not my own. I was just the one who helped it keep the mountain's greatest secret. A secret that starts with my greatest failure, and the ghost I left behind in the snow. It all begins in 1978. I was 24 years old. My brother Liam was 22. We were going to be the youngest Irish brothers to conquer Sagarmatha, the goddess mother of the sky. That's what we called it. We were arrogant, strong, and we thought the mountain owed us something. I can still feel the stiff canvas of our old expedition packs, the smell of kerosene from the stove, the naive belief that our bond was stronger than any storm. Liam, he was the real climber. He had a grace on the ice that I could only mimic. He saw the beauty. While I only saw the challenge, he used to say that we weren't conquering the mountain, we were being granted an audience. I laughed at him then. I've spent the rest of my life understanding what he meant. That climb was our first, and his last. We were caught in a whiteout, just below the summit ridge. You read about these things, you train for them, but you can't comprehend the reality. It's not just snow, it's the world being erased. The sky and the ground become one blinding, roaring sheet of white. I remember the sound more than the cold. The wind wasn't a whistle, it was a solid roar, a physical thing pressing on your chest, stealing the air from your lungs. The only thing that proved we were still moving was the rhythmic, metallic crunch of our crampons biting into the ice. Every step was an act of faith, tethered together, our world reduced to the few feet of rope that connected us. You lose all sense of direction, of up and down. There is only the wind, the ice under your feet, and the person you're tied to. And then the sound of our crampons just stopped. There was a sudden, sickening lurch, a shift in the tension on the rope. I dug my ice axe in, screaming his name into the storm, but the wind ate the words. There was a sound, a horrifyingly small sound, like a dry twig snapping. The sound of a rope breaking, and then a single scream. Not long or loud, but short, sharp, and instantly swallowed by the roar of the storm. It was just gone. One moment he was there, a presence at the end of the line, and the next there was nothing. I was alone in the blank, white void. I survived. He didn't. They mounted a search when the storm cleared. But you don't find things in the death zone. You only lose them. His official cause of death was a fall. For me, it was a sound, a snap, a scream, and then a lifetime of silence. I returned in 1982. It took 4 years to scrape together the money, to face my parents' pleading eyes, to lie and say it was about closure. But it wasn't. It was a pilgrimage, an act of penance. I had no intention of submitting. I was just going back to the place that took him to be where he was last seen. The ambition I had in 78 was gone, burned away by grief and replaced with a quiet, heavy purpose. The climbing community thought I was chasing a ghost, a foolish man returning to the scene of his trauma. They weren't wrong. I was. Every step up through the Khumbu icefall, every night spent in the whispering cold of the high camps, was a conversation with him. I was retracing our steps, trying to find the exact spot where the world ended. I carried the guilt like a second pack, heavier than any gear I had. That's when I first saw it, at Camp 4, in the death zone. Up there, above 8,000 meters, the silence has its own sound. It's not an absence of noise. It's a high-frequency hum that you feel in your teeth, a constant pressure on your eardrums under the ever-present wind. Your body is shutting down, you're breathing canned metallic-tasting oxygen, and your thoughts get slow and syrupy. But that night, as I sat alone outside my tent, there was a change. The hum stopped. The wind died. There was an absolute, dead quiet that was more alarming than any storm. A heavy, profound stillness that felt ancient and alive. The kind of silence that makes the hairs on your arms stand up because you know instinctively that you are no longer alone. I looked up, my eyes scanning the ridgeline above me. Towards the colossal Lot's face, and against the deep, bruised indigo of the pre-dawn sky, I saw a silhouette. It was on a ledge that I knew, with every fiber of my being as a climber, was impossible to reach. It was no place a person could or would rest. The figure was massive, at least 2 heads taller than a tall man, and it was standing upright. It wasn't an animal on 4 legs. It was shaped like a man, but built like a boulder. It wasn't moving. It wasn't threatening. It was just watching me, perfectly still. A silent, unmoving sentinel against the stars. My breath caught in my throat, not from the cold, but from a primordial fear mixed with something I could only describe as reverence. My first instinct was to scream. My hand went to the radio clipped to my jacket, to call down to base camp, to tell someone what I was seeing, to prove I wasn't going mad from the altitude. It's what any normal person would do. You see a monster, you raise the alarm. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize it. A trick of the light, hypoxia, a strange rock formation I'd never noticed. But my gut, the oldest part of me, knew exactly what I was looking at. It felt less like a discovery and more like an introduction, as if I had stumbled into a place where I was not the apex predator, where I was the guest, and I had just been noticed by the host. Every survival instinct I had was screaming to do something, anything. But a deeper instinct took over. A quiet, inexplicable certainty that to make a loud noise, to point a radio at it, to treat it as a threat, would be a profound and irreversible mistake. It felt like standing in a cathedral and seeing an angel. You don't shout, you don't take a picture, you just witness it. And so, in the freezing thin air of the death zone, I did the only thing that felt right. I gave a small, slow, reverent dip of my head. A nod, not of greeting, not of challenge, but of acknowledgement. I see you. I mean no harm. Then, I turned my back on it. A move that should have felt like the most dangerous thing I'd ever done, and slowly zipped myself back inside my tent, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, replaying the image in my mind. The sheer scale of it, the impossible location, the unnerving stillness. The question wasn't just what was it, but what was it doing? It was watching me. It felt personal. The next morning, I expected it to be gone, a dream brought on by a dying brain. But as I packed my gear, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Not in a menacing way. It was a neutral, powerful presence. I made the summit 2 days later, the weather holding in a way the forecasts said was impossible. And as I stood there, looking out over the curve of the earth, I knew I wasn't alone. The mountain was no longer just a tombstone for my brother. It was a sanctuary for something else. I never spoke a word of it to anyone. The secret was mine now. That choice, that single moment of silence, when I should have screamed, set the course for the rest of my life. It was the beginning of an unspoken agreement that would pull me back to that mountain again and again. Not for glory, but for a silent communion that no one on earth would ever understand. I became the keeper of a secret I didn't even comprehend yet. The weight of what I saw was immense, but the weight of what I didn't know was even greater. And it's that unknown I'm going to share with you now. If you've listened this far, and you're willing to follow me back up that mountain, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. Your support lets me know I'm not just talking into the void. Because the story of what happened next, the rules of the pact I had to learn, and the offerings I had to make, that's when I began to understand the true price of the mountain's silence. Stay with me. He was always there after that. That was the start of the ritual, the beginning of the silent agreement that would define the next 40 years of my life. Every 2 or 3 years, I'd return. I'd scrape together the money from odd jobs, tell my wife it was a tribute to Liam, a way to keep his memory alive on the mountain that claimed him. She saw the pain in my eyes and let me go, thinking it was a wound that needed tending. She wasn't wrong, but she didn't know who, or what, was helping me tend to it. My obsession with the mountain was no longer about conquering a peak. It was about seeking an audience with its true sovereign. Each expedition became less about climbing and more about a clandestine meeting on the world's highest stage. The weight of the secret began to shape my life, isolating me in a way even the most remote mountain camp never could. I was living a double life, the aging climber haunted by his past, and the sole parishioner of a church made of ice and rock, with a congregation of one. The pact became formalized on my next trip in 1985. This time, I went with a specific purpose beyond just bearing witness. I felt an overwhelming need to make an offering, to give something back to the presence that had granted me safe passage and, in its own way, acknowledged my vigil. Before leaving Ireland, I took a small carved wooden bird from my father's mantelpiece. It was a simple thing, whittled from a single piece of oak, its wings outstretched. It had sat there for as long as I could remember, a piece of home, of warmth, of a world that didn't know the thin, cold air of 8,000 meters. I carried it wrapped in a wool sock, tucked deep inside my pack, a fragile piece of the lowlands I was bringing to the roof of the world. My pilgrimage now had a tangible token. The logic was insane. I knew that. Leaving a trinket for a monster, but deep down, it felt like the most rational thing I had ever done. It was an exchange, a gesture of respect I hoped would be understood. The climb to Camp 4 was arduous, but this time, the fear was replaced by a sense of nervous anticipation. I reached the familiar spot, just below the lot's face, and set up my small one-man tent. The air was still, the sky a brutal, clear sheet of stars. Before settling in for the night, I walked to the base of that impossible, unclimbable ledge where I had seen him. The rock was sheer, glazed with a layer of blue ice that seemed to glow in the moonlight. With frozen fingers, I unwrapped the small wooden bird. It felt absurdly light in my gloved hand. I found a small crack in the ice, a tiny natural shelf barely big enough, and I placed the bird there, facing out towards the valley. I didn't say anything. There were no words. It was a silent prayer, an offering left at a sacred, secret altar. I gave it a final nod, the same gesture of acknowledgement from 3 years prior, and retreated to my tent. The feeling of being watched more intense and palpable than ever before. That night, the wind didn't howl, it whispered. The temperature was still lethally cold, but the bone-deep hostility of the mountain felt subdued. I slept for a few hours, a deep, dreamless sleep that is nearly impossible in the death zone. When I awoke, the familiar stillness was there, the absolute silence that preceded his appearance. I looked out, and there he was. The same silhouette, in the same spot, a towering figure of profound stillness. He was watching the ledge where I had left the bird. He didn't move towards it, didn't touch it. He just stood there, a guardian observing a gift left on his doorstep. The unspoken rule became clear. The offering was an act of entry, a request for passage. Its acceptance was this silent, watchful presence. The climb to the summit that year was flawless. The weather held, my body felt strong, and the path seemed to open up before me. It was as if the mountain itself was allowing me to pass. I was no longer an intruder. I was an invited guest. On my descent, my heart hammered as I approached Camp 4. I had to know. I made my way back to the icy shelf at the base of the ledge. The sun was high now, and the ice glittered. The crack in the rock was empty. The wooden bird was gone. There were no footprints, no signs of disturbance, no debris. It had simply vanished into the care of the mountain. That was all the confirmation I needed. The pact was real. I had brought a piece of my world, a token of my grief, and in return, I was granted passage and a silent communion. It was a trade, my humanity for his tolerance, my secret for his solitude. Standing there with the wind whipping at my jacket, I felt a profound and terrifying connection. I had made contact. A silent, binding contract had been made between me and a creature unknown to the rest of humankind. The mountain was no longer a place of death for me. It had become the center of a secret life, a purpose that would call me back again and again. This unspoken ritual became the engine of my existence. Every few years, the pull would become unbearable. 1988, 1991, 1994. Each time, I returned. Each time, I brought an offering steeped in meaning. One year, it was one of Liam's worn climbing carabiners. its metal scarred from past adventures. I remember the cold clang it made as I clipped it to a nub of rock. Another time, it was a faded photograph of my brother and me, taken the summer before our first expedition, our arms slung over each other's shoulders, squinting in the Irish sun. I tucked it into a waterproof pouch and wedged it deep into a fissure. Each offering was a piece of my history, a fragment of my loss. And each time, after I left it, the sentinel would appear on his ledge. And each time, on my way down, the offering would be gone. The exchange was consistent, the terms clear in their silence. I honor you with my memory, and you allow me to walk in your domain. It was a strange, symbiotic relationship. The cost of this addiction was immense. The expeditions bankrupted me more than once. The lies to my family grew more elaborate. The distance between my secret world and my real one, stretching into a chasm. They saw a man chasing a ghost, unable to move on. I saw a man tending to a sacred duty. But the rules of this pact were subtle, and I learned one of them the hard way. In the spring of '95, I was rushed. The expedition poorly funded, my heart not fully in it. The offering I brought was careless, an afterthought. It was just a high-energy ration bar, something practical, devoid of memory or meaning. I left it at the spot, feeling a pang of guilt, a sense of having cheated. That night, there was no sentinel. The ledge remained empty, and the silence was not the profound, watchful quiet I had come to know. It was just empty, a dead, hollow silence that promised nothing but indifference. The mountain had rescinded its invitation. The climb that followed was a nightmare. The weather turned without warning. The wind became a physical enemy, tearing at the tent, driving ice crystals into my skin like needles. My stove failed, leaving me without a way to melt snow for water. I experienced a bout of snow blindness that left me nearly helpless for a day. Every step felt like the mountain was actively trying to reject me, to punish me for my lack of respect. I was no longer a guest. I was a trespasser, again, just like in '78. I barely made it down alive, frostbitten and humbled. The lesson was brutal and clear. The offering could not be mere currency. It had to be a sacrifice. It had to carry weight. It had to be a piece of my own story. My own soul. The Guardian wasn't interested in supplies. It was interested in the gesture, in the reverence, in the shared language of loss that we had somehow established. I never made that mistake again. The pact demanded sincerity. The most profound lesson, the one that shifted our relationship from a passive agreement to an active collaboration, happened in 1996. By then, I was climbing with a young, fiercely competent Sherpa guide named Tenzin. He was a traditionalist, a man who listened to the mountain, but he also trusted maps and experience. We were planning our route through the treacherous Khumbu icefall, a constantly moving glacier of ice towers, or seracs, that can collapse without warning. Tenzin was adamant about a specific path, one he had used successfully just weeks before. It was known as the West Ramp, a faster, more direct line. I had my reservations, it felt too exposed, but he was the expert, and I deferred to his judgment. The plan was set. We would leave before dawn and take the West Ramp. The mountain, however, had a different plan for me, and it was about to communicate it directly. That night, the familiar, deep stillness descended upon Camp 2. I knew he was watching. I prepared my offering, a silver locket, from my mother, and went to place it at the base of a large ice formation I had designated as the local altar. As I knelt down, my headlamp beam caught something out of place. Sitting directly on top of my primary oxygen canister, which I had set outside my tent, was an object. It was a single river stone, perfectly smooth, oval-shaped, and jet black. It was cool to the touch. It surfaced like polished silk against my glove. My blood ran cold. I knew the geology of this place intimately. There are no stones like this up here. This was a stone from the river valleys, thousands and thousands of feet below. It couldn't have fallen from the sky, or been exposed by the melting ice. It had been placed there deliberately, a message, a marker. I stared at the stone, my mind racing. Its position was undeniable. It wasn't just near my gear. It was asterisk on asterisk, the one piece of equipment essential for my survival. This wasn't a gift. It was a sign, a warning. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my palm, heavy with intent. I went back and forth in my mind. Tenzin's experience versus this impossible object. A man's logic versus a monster's wisdom. To tell him the truth was impossible. He would think I was suffering from altitude-induced psychosis and have me evacuated. My secret was a wall I couldn't breach. So I had to make a choice. Trust the man who had climbed this mountain dozens of times, or trust the silent guardian who had never failed me. In the end, the weight of that smooth, black stone in my hand was heavier than any argument Tenzin could make. It felt like a direct command from the mountain's true master. I woke Tenzin before dawn. I didn't tell him about the stone. Instead, I lied. I told him I had a terrible feeling, a premonition, a dream of the west ramp collapsing. I played the part of the superstitious old climber, the man whose nerves were getting the better of him. He was frustrated, arguing that my bad feeling would cost us a day, that we were wasting a perfect weather window. I held my ground, insisting we take the longer, more stable central path. He called me a stubborn fool, but he respected my age and my history on the mountain, and reluctantly, he agreed. The cost of protecting the secret, I was learning, was not just my dignity, but also the trust of those around me. We set off on the longer route. The tension between us as thick and cold as the air we were breathing. I kept the black stone in my pocket, clutching it like a rosary. Hours later, as the sun began to warm the high peaks, we heard it. It wasn't a crack or a roar. It was a deep, guttural groan that vibrated through the soles of our boots, a sound that came from the very bones of the mountain. We turned and looked back across the glacier. The entire section of the icefall that made up the west ramp, the path we were supposed to be on, was gone. A serac the size of a multi-story building had peeled away and collapsed, pulverizing tons of ice into a chaotic field of ruin. Anyone on that path would have been obliterated instantly, without a trace. Tenzin stood frozen, his face pale with shock, and whispered a prayer to Sagamatha for sparing us. He called it divine intervention, a miracle. But I knew better. I felt the smooth, cold weight of the river stone in my pocket. It wasn't divine intervention. It was him. It was a warning. The pact had changed. He wasn't just a passive observer accepting my grief offerings anymore. He was an active guardian. His intelligence was undeniable, his motives protective. The secret I carried grew heavier, more complex. This wasn't just a cryptid I was observing. It was a being I was in communication with, a partner in survival. The rules were becoming clearer with each climb. The offerings had to be sincere. The communication would be through objects, signs left for me to interpret, and his protection was real, powerful, and utterly terrifying in its implications. The addiction to return was no longer just about penance for Liam. It was about continuing this impossible dialogue. I was bound to him and to the mountain by a debt of gratitude and a shared secret that set me apart from the rest of the world. The mountain remembers, Liam used to say. I was beginning to understand it didn't just remember, it acted. Over the next decade, the bond solidified in these small, unspoken episodes. The relationship moved beyond just offerings and warnings. It became company. In 2005, I was pinned down by a sudden, violent storm at Camp 3. The wind was a shrieking demon, threatening to rip my tent from its ice screws. I was certain my time was up, that this was the storm that would finally claim me. Huddled inside, listening to the fabric groan, I peered out through a small zip, expecting to see nothing but a maelstrom of white. But through the swirling snow, I saw him. A dark shape, barely visible against the roaring chaos, standing on a ridge above me. He wasn't on his usual ledge. He was closer. And he seemed to be standing asterisk against asterisk the wind, a living breakwater, his immense form absorbing the main fury of the gale. The roar of the wind on my tent lessened, the physical pressure eased. He stood there for hours, a tireless bulwark against the storm, until the worst of it passed. It was an act of profound, impossible care. That night changed everything. He was no longer just a distant sentinel. He was a conscious protector. I felt not just observed, but shielded. I started to wonder about his own solitude. 40 years I'd been coming here, and I had never seen another of his kind. Was he the last one? Was his vigil as lonely as my own? The questions multiplied, deepening the mystery. But the fear was gone, replaced by a strange, familial sense of responsibility. I was his only link to a world that would hunt him if it knew he existed, and he was my only link to a world beyond grief, a world of quiet wonder. We were two old hermits, one of rock and one of flesh, sharing the silence of the high peaks. My offerings became more personal than ever, not just tokens of loss, but tokens of this shared existence. A small leather-bound book of poetry, a hand-knitted wool hat my wife made for me, things that spoke of warmth and life, not just memory and death. The mountain, however, was changing. The quiet reverence I knew from the 70s and 80s was disappearing, replaced by a commercial frenzy. Everest became a circus, a bucket list item for corporate executives with more money than sense. The slopes were littered with discarded oxygen bottles and the noise of wealthy, guided clients who treated Cigar Mother not as a goddess, but as a commodity. They saw a peak. I saw a tombstone, and now a desecrated sanctuary. The real danger to my secret was no longer the mountain itself, but the sheer volume of humanity crawling all over it. Every new expedition brought more eyes, more cameras, more chances for a random, careless glance towards that impossible ledge. My anxiety grew with each passing season. I wasn't worried about my own safety anymore. I was worried about his. I became a paranoid guardian, watching the other climbers as much as I watched for him. The near disaster I had been dreading finally came in 2012. The expedition season was a spectacle of corporate branding. One team, in particular, was loud, arrogant, and draped in the logos of some tech company. They were less interested in climbing and more interested in content creation. They brought satellite uplinks, high-definition cameras, and worst of all, drones. These things were new to the high-altitude environment then, buzzing like angry metallic insects through the sacred silence of the western CWM. The sound was a violation, an electronic whine that grated against the natural symphony of wind and ice. I watched them with a growing sense of dread, my stomach twisting into a cold knot. They flew their machines recklessly, chasing shots, with no respect for the other climbers or the sanctity of the place. They were a virus, and I knew, with a sick certainty, that their carelessness would lead them to him. My fears were realized one crystal-clear morning at Camp 4. I was watching the familiar ledge through my small binoculars when the telltale whine started. One of their drones was ascending, zipping past my position, heading directly for the upper slopes of Lhotse. It hovered for a moment, then made a direct line for his ledge. My heart leaped into my throat. From my vantage point, I saw the drone, a black speck against the ice, getting closer and closer to the shadowed area where he stood. I focused my binoculars on the ledge, and for the first time in all my years of watching, I saw him move with agitation. He flinched, a subtle but sharp recoil, as the machine approached. He took a step back, melting deeper into the shadows of the rock. He was exposed, vulnerable, a clear shot for a high-resolution camera. The secret that I had kept for over 30 years was about to be broken by a toy. In that instant, a cold, protective rage washed over me. Decades of grief, pilgrimage, and silent communion culminated in a single, desperate thought. I had to stop it. There was no time to yell, no way to reason with them. The drone pilot was a young man sitting on a camp stool 50 feet away, staring intently at a video screen on his controller, a triumphant grin on his face. He was laughing, shouting to his friends about the insane shot he was getting. He was completely oblivious. A child playing with a fire he couldn't comprehend. I looked at the drone, then at the man, then back towards the ledge where my silent partner was being cornered. I saw my whole secret world, the only thing that gave my life meaning beyond my loss, about to be shattered and turned into a viral video. I knew what I had to do. There was a price for everything on this mountain, and I was about to pay it. I got up, feigning a shiver from the cold, and began walking a slow, deliberate path towards their small encampment. My movements were stiff, my limbs heavy with altitude, but my mind was laser-focused. They were laughing, distracted, pointing at the screen. As I passed behind the pilot, I stumbled. It wasn't a dramatic fall, but a clumsy geriatric lurch, the kind of misstep an old man, weary from the thin air, might make. My boot caught the leg of his stool, and as I went down onto one knee, my arm shot out, supposedly to break my fall. My hand connected with the drone controller he was holding. It wasn't a violent slap, just a solid, decisive impact. The controller flew from his grasp, tumbling end over end through the air, and arced beautifully over the edge of the ridge, disappearing into a deep blue-black crevasse thousands of feet below. A tiny, satisfying crack echoed up a moment later. The silence that followed was broken by a roar of outrage. The young pilot was on his feet, his face contorted with fury. "You clumsy old fool. Do you know what you just did? That was a $50,000 piece of equipment." His teammates surrounded me, their faces a mixture of disbelief and contempt. I stayed on my knee for a moment, catching my breath, the pain in my old joints very real. I looked up at them, putting on my most bewildered and apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled, my voice weak. I just lost my footing. The altitude, they didn't buy it for a second. They called me a senile old man, a jealous relic from a bygone era, a saboteur. They threatened to report me, to have my climbing permits revoked forever. I let them vent, absorbing their insults like a shield. I let them see me as pathetic, clumsy, and irrelevant. It was a small price to pay. I had sacrificed my dignity, my reputation among that new generation of climbers. But the secret was safe. They packed up their remaining gear in a huff, shooting me looks of pure hatred, and descended the mountain to complain to the authorities about the crazy old man who destroyed their drone. I never saw them again. As they left, I looked back up at the ledge. The drone was gone, crashed or lost. The shadows were empty. He was gone. But the silence that returned was not an empty one. It was the deep, profound, watchful silence I knew so well. It was the silence of gratitude. I had paid the toll. The cost of protecting our secret, I realized, was my own standing in the world I came from. And as I stood there, alone again, in the vast emptiness, I knew I would pay it, again and again, gladly. The hooks of this secret were in me deep, but they weren't just about why he was there. They were now about what I was willing to do to keep him safe. The 2012 incident was a turning point. It proved that my passive guardianship was no longer enough. The world was shrinking. Technology was erasing the last blank spots on the map, and the greatest threat to him wasn't an avalanche or a storm. It was human curiosity. My subsequent climbs became less about pilgrimage and more about patrol. I timed my expeditions to coincide with the busiest seasons, acting as a quiet, unseen warden. I would subtly redirect trekking groups away from sensitive areas with stories of unstable ice, or accidentally spill water on a long-range camera lens. I became a master of minor, plausibly deniable sabotage. Fellow climbers started to see me as a bit of a nuisance, an eccentric old man prone to accidents and strange moods. I embraced the role. My reputation was another offering laid at the altar of his solitude. This constant vigilance took a toll. The paranoia was exhausting. Every new climber was a potential threat. Every distant glint of light, a possible camera lens. The bond with the Guardian deepened in this shared siege. There were nights I'd see him on the ledge, and I would just sit outside my tent, 2 sentinels sharing a silent watch. Once, after I diverted a particularly noisy group of climbers, I found a single, brilliant white feather at my offering spot knot from any bird I knew of in this region. It was impossibly large and soft, a thank you, a symbol I didn't know. I just knew our language was growing more complex. We were no longer just a man and a cryptid. We were allies, bound together against the encroaching world. But this escalation was unsustainable. I was getting older, and the world was getting closer. A confrontation felt inevitable. The change I had been dreading, the one that would alter our pact forever, came in 2018. It was to be my 10th registered summit, a milestone that felt hollow and insignificant compared to the secret climbs I had made. My body was failing. The altitude bit deeper. The cold settled in my bones in a way it never had before. I was 64 years old, an ancient age in this lethal environment. Every step was a battle. I was hypoxic, exhausted, and more haunted than ever by Liam's ghost. He was on my mind constantly. His 22-year-old face superimposed over the harsh landscape. I was climbing for him, for the Guardian. But mostly, I think I was climbing towards an ending. I sensed this would be the last time I had the strength. I was preparing to say goodbye to one ghost and one Guardian. Near the summit, in the thin, hallucinatory air, my body gave out. I collapsed in the snow, the world dissolving into a shimmering, white haze. The only sound was the mechanical hiss of my oxygen mask, a sound that suddenly felt alien and insufficient. I wasn't just tired, I was dying. I could feel it, a peaceful, cold certainty, and in that moment, I saw him. Liam, clear as day, standing a few feet away, not as a ghost of memory, but as a vibrant, real presence. He was young, smiling, beckoning me to get up. To join him, I wanted to. The pull to let go, to finally rest with him in the snow, was overwhelming. My life's pilgrimage was over. But then, a new sound cut through the ethereal silence of my hallucination. A sound that was impossible. A sound I had never heard before. It was a low, resonant hum. It wasn't a noise that traveled through the air. It was a vibration that resonated through the ice, up through my prone body, and into my very bones. It wasn't loud or threatening. It was mournful. A deep, sonorous note of profound sadness. The vibration was grounding, real, pulling me out of the seductive, deathly vision of my brother. With immense effort, I lifted my head, my vision swimming. I looked towards the ledge, his ledge. He was there, the Guardian. But his posture was different. His head was slightly bowed, his massive shoulders slumped. It was a posture of grief, a mirror to the sorrow I had carried for 40 years. In that moment, watching him, feeling that mournful hum vibrate